My name is Justin Ziegler. I am an attorney with Jay-Z Helps, an injury law firm in Florida. We represent people who get injured. And today I'm going to talk about femur fractures in car accidents, motorcycle accidents, truck accidents, and all type of accidents. You can see this is an image. This is the femur bone. It extends from the top of the hip to right above the kneecap. This article concentrates on claims where someone else's carelessness, whether a person or a business, caused your femur fracture. Okay? This is an image of the femur. You can see the different labels of the femur, the different parts of it. What are the different kinds of femur fractures? First off, you have a displaced versus non-displaced fracture. A non-displaced fracture is after you fracture your femur and the femur bone is still lined up. Okay? A displaced fracture is where the bone shifts a little bit and moves. All things equal, the full settlement value of a displaced fracture is worth more than a non-displaced fracture. What do I mean by full value? Full value is when you add your out-of-pocket medical bills, lost wages that you're not paid, and money for pain and suffering all together. And you do not discount or reduce the case value for any of the many factors that may reduce the value of your case. Now, there's exceptions to the fact that a displaced fracture is worth more than a non-displaced fracture. If you have very, very little displacement, it may not be worth more or that much more. A closed fracture is where the bone does not break the surface. There's also an open fracture, which is where the bone pierces through the skin. All things equal, an open fracture is worth significantly much more than a closed fracture. Right off the bat, you have the nature of the fact that there's a bone piercing through your skin, which is shocking to almost all people. Taking photos in a femur fracture case. In any personal injury case, you always want to take photos. In a femur fracture case, the odds are you're not going to be able to take a photo of the bone piercing through your skin if you have an open fracture. That's going to be too painful. Your family members or friends are not. It's the last thing on their mind is to take a picture of the bone piercing through the skin. However, if you do have the bone piercing through the skin, be sure to take a photo of the fracture. Open fractures, in addition to having a higher full settlement value than closed fractures, also impact the surrounding muscles, ligaments, and tendons. Or actually, I should say, may impact those. If they do impact those, muscles, ligaments, and tendons, that adds additional value to the full value of the case. One of the reasons why femur fractures are worth a lot of money generally, and again, when I say a lot of money, I'm talking about the full value without subtracting any factors that reduce the value of your claim. And I'm going to get to that in a second, some of those factors, but that is on your case on its best day in a perfect world if there were no problems with your case. Femur fractures, you're generally going to have intense pain. The femur, after all, is one of the long bones in the body. So when you fracture it, it takes a ton of force to fracture it, and you're going to have a lot of pain. You likely will not be able to put any weight on your leg, your femur, the bone. So that also increases the value because you're not able to walk or walk normally. It may result in temporary deformity as well, with it looking very strange. Now, as you can imagine, if you have surgery to your femur, that increases the full value of the claim. Why? Well, there's pain and suffering associated with surgery. You're going through many risks, death, infection, etc. And there could be a psychological component of fear, of you having fear associated with those. Surgery drives up the out-of-pocket medical bills and or health insurance or other insurance liens. And surgery generally means you're going to be out of work for at least some period of time. Even if you work from a desk or work from home, generally you're going to be on narcotics, painkillers after surgery, so you're going to be out of work for a certain period of time. Also, surgery with a femur fracture, it's going to leave an incision where staples are going to be placed in your leg. You want to take pictures of that for sure, and you'll likely be left with on your best day a pencil scar, on your worst day a scar that raises above the surface. This is another image of the femur. Pain and suffering settlement range. One of the million-dollar questions people ask, I shouldn't say million-dollar, but one of the main questions people ask, hey Justin, how much is my femur fracture worth? The numbers I'm going to give are for full value. Once again, that's on on a good day without any reductions such as your fault, the other driver possibly being at fault or not being at fault, etc. I say that, generally speaking, based on looking up jury verdicts and or settlements, which is what the insurance companies base their offers off of, past jury verdicts and settlements, in addition to all the facts of your case. This starting point for the pain and suffering component, that's one of the components of a case. Remember, you also have lost wages, medical bills, and other components. The full value, I'll put it at somewhere around $200,000 to $500,000 just for the pain and suffering component. Now, the low end of the range is for a good recovery, as little treatment as possible. You heal, everything goes as good as possible. The upper end of the range, the $500,000 for pain and suffering component, is going to be when your healing is delayed, you have some complications, and you're left with some type of permanent disability. Now, one of the things you want to be sure to ask your doctor, or he may tell you on his own, is are there going to be any future limitations? If you have a femur fracture, particularly one that results in surgery, it may affect the way that you walk. You may overcompensate by putting more weight on the leg that is not fractured. That in turn may cause lower back pain, which can add value. If your doctor tells you that you have complications, be sure to look at your medical records, which you're going to want to send to the insurance adjuster for the responsible party. But be sure to look and see if the doctor mentions the permanent effects that your femur fracture is going to have on your life. If not, ask him to write a letter stating those. He may charge you, but it's worth every penny. If you hire an attorney, the attorney will front the cost of that, will pay for that. And then if you're able to settle the case, if the case does settle or get resolved, the attorney will be, after his attorney's fee, be reimbursed for that cost. Again, I alluded to the factor, mentioned the factors, many factors that affect the femur fracture claim. There's at least close to 90 that I've written about. And throughout this article here, you're going to see hyperlinks, links to other articles I've wrote, and some of them are also have a video on them, and so forth. I'm not going to go into any of all the factors. I've been over some of them, your fault, whether the other person's at fault, etc. But that whole talk is an hour talk just in itself, and that's just skimming the surface. No insurance equals no settlement. There's exceptions to this rule, but if the other party doesn't have liability insurance or money to pay your claim, which generally it's going to be some large company is going to be the one to have money or liability insurance, you generally, unfortunately, are going to be left with little to nothing. I've talked a lot about the money for pain and suffering that you may be entitled to if you're injured during work and your only case is against your employer. You're not entitled to pain and suffering. Now, if you're injured during work and you have a claim against a third party, another party other than your employer, you may be entitled to pain and suffering. Pain and suffering does apply to employees who are injured while working on a boat or a ship or a passenger on a cruise ship. Again, you need to prove that the other party, whether it's a driver or a store or whoever, negligence, carelessness caused your accident in order to even get 1 cent for pain and suffering. Throughout the internet, you might find online calculators that tell you how much a femur fracture is worth. We even have one on our website. I highly, 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 highly recommend you don't use those. Again, there's over 87 factors that go into determining the value. Even personal injury attorneys who have been practicing 12 plus years still have questions to ask. Sometimes they'll bounce or they'll look at jury verdicts and settlements to see how much the going rate for a femur fracture is. There's just so many factors, and it's not just one simple one-size-fits-all. I'm going to talk about a couple claims we've had for femur fractures. We recently represented a scooter rider who was hit by a car. He fractured his femur. He had surgery on his femur. He had some Had a scar as well, but even if he just had the femur fracture alone without the scar on his face, he would have received the $35,000 that we were able to recover for him. Unfortunately, that the value of that case was significantly higher than the $35,000, and the unfortunate part is we were left with just $35,000 in available insurance, which unfortunately is way too common in Florida. Geico and United Auto were the two insurers that paid that case. We also represented a very sweet lady who tripped and fell over a curb. And when I say curb, it was in the courtyard of an apartment complex. She was walking straight. There was a little raised area. She kept walking straight, all within the courtyard. She claimed that she did not see it. She tripped over it. She fractured her leg. This is the actual CT scan or x-ray from the case. You can see a rod. This is the femur. A rod was drilled into it. A screw was placed there, and the other rod was placed there. This is called an intramedullary rod. It goes right through the bone. The result is confidential. What if Florida appeals courts said about what's a fair value for a femur fracture? Well, one appeals court in Florida said that $575,000 was a reasonable amount for the pain and suffering component associated with femur fracture. Essentially, they said that the jury had awarded $575,000 just for the pain and suffering component alone. They said that is not so unreasonable as to be overturned, reversed, taken away. Now, that person, as you can see, recovered additional money in addition to that pain and suffering award. So those are good results, in my opinion, based on all the facts. On the other hand, you may get zero for your case. What's an example of that? There's a shopper who got zero when he was in Publix. He walked in, while he was shopping at Publix, he claimed another shopper was on a scooter and hit him, and he blamed Publix for not properly directing the traffic, the pedestrian traffic, and preventing this from happening. Customer said other shopper knocked him down. The trial was just to determine fault. They didn't even get to how much the case was worth. Just was Publix at fault or not. The shopper suffered a comminuted fracture of his femur. That means the bone broke off to many pieces, more than one piece. He had surgery. His family said, when I say his family, the personal representative of the estate filed lawsuit against Publix. They said the femur fracture ultimately caused his death. Publix, number one, said that the shopper caused his own fall. He just fell down. They did nothing wrong. He wasn't even struck by another shopper in a shopping cart. The jury, as in many cases, if not all cases, gets to watch surveillance if it existed. In this case, it seemed like the surveillance favored Publix because the jury found Publix not at fault. Another claim, a shopper won $1.3 million for a femur fracture. She was shopping at Costco in Miami-Dade County, and the award for just the pain and suffering component alone was $1 million. Now, that is not your typical simple, meaning no complications femur fracture. There, I believe, was a recommendation for a future knee replacement. She was 57 years old. I hope this video helped you. I hope you subscribe to our YouTube channel. I hope you like it, and feel free to call me anytime, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year at 888-594-3577. 888-JZ-HELPS. Please call me.